We are not your grandmothers and grandfathers in NAACP, and I know some chapters that's what I think of. We wanted to make this organization that already existed, that had a name, to see if we could make it work more effectively for justice in our community. Well, the first thing, those statements are almost always made by people that do nothing. Those are the people that sit on the sideline and complain, but they do nothing. They either hide behind fake patriotism, wrap themselves up in an American flag, trying to pretend that they're more American than you. Part of the thing that they do is they try to make black people less American than other people. That's where the whole thing about go back to Africa. Interesting thing is that the Europeans brought Africans here as slaves. And so, you know, own your shit. If you did it, own it. Stop pretending that it didn't happen. We had people that say, you know, it was wrong what the police did, but the looting is just as bad. Or black people kill other black people. And these are issues that ought to be discussed. But those are false equivalencies. There's a moral equivalency between what looters did and professional, trained, state-backed, domestic military that we call the police to kill unarmed black people. There's no equation. And the people that's doing that, they're lying and they're being disingenuous. Tell you what, stop killing unarmed black people and you wouldn't have had the problem to begin with, now would you? I had a minister the other day said, well, you know, I want to address this, but blacks kill other blacks. Well, 85 to 90% of whites that are killed in America are killed by other whites. We don't say that we don't address issues of injustice because white people kill other whites. That's the classic false equivalency. That's called deflection. They're trying to deflect away from the importance and significance of a problem, and then they're trying to project the problem back onto the victim. It's a classic political move. I've had it done to me all the time. Still do it. They'll probably do it after this video comes out. One thing that's remained constant throughout this 400-year history, black people have never been able to physically protect themselves against the system of white supremacy in any of its iterations. Economically, they couldn't defend themselves, politically couldn't defend themselves, and physically couldn't defend themselves. White men have always been free to murder and kill black people whenever they got ready. And until recently, they were almost never brought to trial, never even convicted of it. So when we go back, there's three things in my mind that demonstrate whether a people are fully civilized. That means if they have the ability to define who they are. That's one of the reasons why my name is Shabaka, Afrika, because it's an attempt on my part to give a definition for myself that didn't come from Europe and didn't come from slave owners and oppressors. Secondly, they have to be able to provide for themselves. That means you have to own your economics, you have to own your politics, you have to own the ability to feed yourself, you have to own all those things. And finally, you have to have self-defense. As long as black people or any people cannot defend themselves, and everything else that they discuss would be academic. The Native Americans were wiped out almost to the person back in the 1800s because they didn't have the ability really to defend themselves against the white war machines. Those are the truths. So until you develop the capacity to defend yourself, you know, a few years ago we did a press conference and we were in support of I think it was a black minister that was head of the SCLC in Atlanta. And several of us were here, even some of the people that have fallen out with us since, many of them. And I remember one young man kept wanting me to bring out firearms, you know, let people have firearms. And I said, no, because people have a right to carry firearms. Second Amendment says that you can carry firearms openly, especially in the state of Arkansas. But I felt like that would take away from the integrity of what we were trying to say. We were trying to show solidarity. This minister said that the marching didn't work, so he was recommending that black people take advantage of the Second Amendment. They said, you want black people to arm themselves against the police? I said, no, I didn't say that. But I can tell you this, a people that cannot defend themselves will always be vulnerable to physical attacks. We had Dr. Martin Luther King here in 1968 that was murdered over there. And our research shows that somewhere between federal government with J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI and Memphis police, and probably with some assistance from some black leaders, that's how he wound up dead. And so the question I used to ask, well, why weren't there any black people there to defend his life? And in America, the whole point is to keep you disarmed. That's one of the reasons why whenever you say Black Lives Matter, that's you're arming yourself with a psychology. People want to take that away from you. When you explain your experience as a black man in America, and people pretend that that can't be so, they're disarming you. They want to keep you disarmed. But when black men stand in solidarity, along with whatever other people choose morally to join with them, that's how you start to arm yourself. Now there are groups around the country that are starting to have armed black militias. People say, well, do you agree with that? I said, I have nothing to do with that. Do you think black folks should arm themselves? I don't know, do you? I can't tell people what to do. I don't recommend anything in that regard. I think that logic and reason should determine what you do. But I can tell you this, that if you cannot defend yourself, you will always be brutalized and exploited. The police, white roving gangs of white men used to kill black folk. But a lot of those roving gangs of white militias, Klan, Nazis, neo-Nazis, they're on police departments. If you looked at Chauvin as he murdered slowly George Floyd, you were looking at a psychopath. And if anybody would read, there's a short book by the late Bobby Wright, Dr. Bobby Wright. He said white supremacy is a psychopathic racial personality. It murders and harms without remorse. Was there any remorse there? And after they were, after the mayor did the right thing and arrested them, the county prosecutor waited 4 days to bring charges. And he waited even longer. Actually, the case had to be turned over to the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, to bring charges against the other man. 99% of police officers do a good job. You saw him in Buffalo push the older white man down. You saw them beating and slinging people down. And unfortunately, some police officers do wind up getting hurt. And I don't advocate hurting anybody. I really don't. And I grieve for their families because we're all human beings. And I have to say that. But what I saw was people who were tired of something. And everybody says another false equation. Say, well, you know, peacefully protest. I don't know what that means, peacefully protest. Protest makes you uncomfortable. We had an attorney for the NAACP. We had this conversation with him in his office in Jonesboro. And he said that, and I compared what Colin Kaepernick did to Rosa Parks keeping her seat on the bus, 1955 in Montgomery, and what Muhammad Ali did in 1967. It was a principled stand. Just like when the Jesus of Scripture went before the rotten, no good Pharisees and called them snakes and vipers and murderers and thieves. That's Scripture, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And he told me, no, what he did was different. I said, well, why is it that black folk always got to explain to you why we feel aggrieved? And he said, well, how are we going to understand? And I said, I personally don't care if you don't. You do understand. You want to keep things the same way. And you're pretending that you don't understand, but you do. They were uncomfortable because Colin Kaepernick seemed to appear to challenge their white symbols, Star Spangled Banner and the flag. What does the flag mean? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We were all born here, we're American slaves. We have the right to be humans. We have the right not to be killed. We have a right to express ourselves the way that we want to. And for those that can't stand that, I don't know what to tell them. I don't. I have no idea what to tell them. They do what they do. But I will tell you this. There is nobody that does not understand white supremacy and the murder, slaughter, and enslavement of African people for 400 years. There's no one that does not understand it. Whoever says that, whether you're black or white, You are lying. You are a liar. You know better than that. You know exactly what's going on here. You just don't want me to exercise our rights to be men, both male and female. You are actually telling me, just like during slavery, I don't own my children, that you can kill my children. You can kill my wife. You can kill my son, and you can go home and have a beer. There are people telling you, nope, they're not going to tolerate that. Nobody wants that to happen. And I would suggest that any people that tolerate that level of abuse for that many years, that's a reprobate behavior itself. We have a right to defend ourselves and a responsibility to. The police have police unions, and they have a code that they go by where they don't tell on one another. Everybody knows that, don't they? Is there anyone who doesn't know that? Is there anyone who does not know that? Okay, so why is everybody lying? Everybody know that police lie and cover up. The old man that they pushed down, they claimed he tripped and fell. We saw it on TV. I was stopped in 2011 in January as I was pulling from 7th Street on the Highway 77. This is an interesting story. I was pulled over, and the police officer, Taylor, the black police officer here in West Memphis Police Force, still there, Taylor. Can't remember his first name. He said that as another police officer said that he observed you weaving across the road. Have you been drinking? I don't drink. Now, I'm knowing all the time you stepped up to my window, you didn't smell alcohol, you don't hear me stuttering. They asked me out of the car. Another police officer came up, have you been drinking? I said, no, sir. He said, are you sure? I said, pretty sure I don't drink. And as they sit there and interrogated me, I was busy putting my hair, which is pretty long, in a ponytail holder, which takes some physical dexterity, and I'm doing it backwards. So they had me do the breathalyzer test, and I'm kind of glad that they did because I never experienced that. So when he got through, I wasn't able to find my proof of insurance at the time that he stopped me, so I found, he said, well, I don't need it. I thought, oh, he didn't need that. He then said, he gave me a ticket. It said for careless and prohibitive driving. And he signed another officer, Sergeant D.J. O'Clair's name to it. D.J. O'Clair, he's no longer on the police force now because he had a lot of complaints on him. And when I saw the officer that stopped me, he didn't sign the ticket. He signed another officer's ticket. Now, you know that's out of order. And I looked at him, I said, oh, okay. I said, I see what this is about. He immediately started saying, I didn't have anything to do with it, I didn't have anything. Of course he knew everything, he knew what was going on. He did. And so I wound up having to go through all the hell, going to court and all that stuff. And so the judge dismissed the charges because the lawyer, the officers who gave me the ticket didn't sign the ticket. What was that? And I had a police officer tell me in Memphis, Tennessee a long time ago, say we shoot people in this state for speeding. I've had one lawyer, when I was telling another officer about it, said, well, you're lucky you didn't get shot. So what I'm saying is this stuff happens all the time. Now, there are a lot of officers that do great work. I've had some great experiences with officers. I've had them not to write me a ticket because they said, can you not write me a ticket? Most police officers that I've encountered have been decent folk. The problem is that there's a system that allows them to be not be good and not be fair and not be just, and they can get away with it. I think probably most police officers don't do it. I know a lot of police. I got several friends that are on the police force because somebody's going to raise that you're anti-police. That's another false statement. That's a straw man argument. You don't like the police. That's not true. I personally think we need law enforcement, but as one former New York City captain said after he was retired, he said, law enforcement is a noble profession, but it needs external oversight. I think everybody knows that. Now, the people that tell you they don't, they're lying to you. They want to protect their right to loot and pillage, which again is what white supremacy is. It's the right of white men to control the world and its natural resources, and nobody can do anything about it. I understand that. I'm not mad about it. I have actually made it my life's mission to understand and speak about white supremacy and the pathology of black powerlessness. I will have to say that these young people, you better watch a lot of the older political and religious leaders. Most of them are corrupt. and they will join on and make money off the system, you better figure out ways to govern and move and insist upon taking control of the mechanisms of governing. You have to have governing. That's what dominion over everything means in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. Dominion means to govern. You have to be able to govern. And you have a lot of greedy interests that will take advantage of this movement and co-opt it. But they'll have to find that out on themselves. Oh, I wanted to mention this. I've heard 2 or 3 white government officials recently said there is no systemic racism in America and in the police force. And my response is, you're a liar. Don't overthink it. You're just lying. You know better than that. You're trying to protect your lie. So whenever you hear them say there's no systemic racism or things aren't as bad, you say, he's lying. He knows better. I've always found it odd to have a white person in particular, but anybody, that said there's not really any racism. And you hear that from some of the hand-picked gatekeepers. Some people call them coons. I won't call them that today, but some people call the gatekeepers coons. And you know a tree by the fruit that it bears. You see Shaq, what he does, and Ray Lewis. Everybody sees that, or what Marcellus Wallace said. Now, isn't it interesting now that Colin Powell now has been validated? I don't hear him saying anything now. I was wrong, Shaq. I was wrong, Ray Lewis. I was wrong. You really weren't protesting the flag. But what if he was? What if he was protesting the flag? What if he was protesting the national? And what of it? 400 years of history, 250 years of chattel slavery. 250 years of chattel slavery, where we had no rights, no privileges, no nothing. 100+ years of Jim Crow, where we were murdered and slaughtered and stolen. Down in Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. They murdered, the history books say 200 people were killed. Griff Stockley, in his book, Blood in Their Eyes, said it was more like 800 and possibly 1,500, because in 1919, the governor of Arkansas moved in with a half a battalion of federal troops and mowed down black folk for days. They burned down the courthouse, stole their land, and then so they burned down the courthouse to make sure that there were no records of the land ownership. Black Wall Street, Greenwood, Oklahoma, burned down the entire town. I got the story right here. Black Wall Street. The United States government, state governments, local governments, sheriff departments, police departments, school districts have all been historically weaponized to exploit and to murder and to destroy the lives of black folk, and to make specifically sure that they didn't have equal access to the mechanisms of government, the mechanisms of so-called justice, and the mechanisms for wealth. That's what white supremacy is about. We are not your grandmothers and grandfathers in NAACP, and I know some chapters that's what I think of. We wanted to make this organization that already existed, that had a name, to see if we could make it work more effectively for justice in our community.